esteemed panelists today from different industries, continents. I will start with Diane Sirko, representing Siemens. And actually, Diane is in charge of the talent acquisition space and also in the US. She's leading this work, but she has long years from IBM also, so very much into the tech space, talent acquisition space. So welcome, Diane, great to see you here. And then I am seeing Irene Santos is joining from Canada, I would say today. She is in charge of the global talent acquisition for TD Bank, but also she's the vice president of HR for HR. So we like these dual roles, and that's happening more and more, I guess. Derek Hall is joining from Africa as the Group Executive Organizational Effectiveness for Liquid Telecom. And he's going to be giving us actually the insights from the continent, but also from the industry. And we are going to have also Did Pwc from PwC as the head of executive search. But at this point, given that we have most of our guests here, we will be kicking off. We have limited time, and thank you for all joining today. I would like to hand it over to Tiffany for moderating this session.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. And I know that whenever something starts at the top of the hour, we are always busy wrapping things up quickly, getting a new cup of tea or glass of water, etc. So we know that we're going to continue to have guests joining us as we start. What I would like to recommend is if everyone except for our panelists could turn your cameras off and turn your microphones off. We'll have a chance to turn those back on a little bit later in our session today when we get into the Q&A piece. And we would encourage everyone to bring your questions forward. We've got two ways to do that. Again, we have our chat, our little chat room down here. So please feel free to put in your questions into that chat room and we'll try and get to them. And our panelists may even just respond to you directly as they see the messages come in. But we do have a Q&A portion a little bit later that we're going to use and where you'll have the opportunity to put your camera on and ask questions at that. We are recording this session. We do have a number of friends in HR and in business leadership roles who have asked us to record this session because it is just such an important topic for us. So thanks again for everyone for joining in and participating. And when I'm kicking off on our first question to our panelists, I would encourage everyone who is joining online to just put in the chat room or in that chat area where you're joining us from. What city are you joining us from today? Because that's just going to be interesting for all of us. We know we have about 15 countries joining us here today. So please go ahead and fill that in. That would be great. So the topic today is really around how the employee value proposition has changed over the last 18 months to 2 years. We know that there has been a lot of shifts in how organizations have had to operate remotely, bringing in new policies, but also a massive focus on purpose and sustainability and what an organization actually stands for. Hi, David, thanks. So we would really like to start there. And we know that there's a number of questions that come off of it, but we've asked for each of our panelists to dive in a little bit on their company and what has changed. Like, how has the pandemic and this last 2 years, how has that impacted the employee value proposition at your own organization? And maybe I could ask Diane to start with Siemens, and then Derek, followed by Irene and David. So Diane.
Thank you, Tiffany. So just starting off with a little bit of background on Siemens. Most people, they hear the name and they say, yeah, I know it, but what exactly do they do? Because we're in everything. So Siemens is a global industrial technology company. We're in sustainable energy, transportation, healthcare, factories of the future, smart buildings, smart cities, just to name a few. Our global headquarters is in Munich, Germany. Our US headquarters is in Washington, DC. We've got about 300,000 employees worldwide. and about 50,000 here in the US across our various brands and legal entities and businesses. So pretty big footprint here. How's the pandemic impacted us? Well, I mean, we only have an hour, right, for this. I'm sure you can all relate to that. So, you know, we're experiencing what every other similar large company is experiencing right now. We've got higher than average voluntary attrition, so retaining talent is a challenge. At the same time, job applicant volumes are significantly lower than they were pre-pandemic. So we're struggling to attract talent. Employees who are here are burned out, anxious, overwhelmed, stressed. You pick it, all of the above, right? So it's all hard, and there are no easy answers. I actually had a leader ask me the other day in a meeting, like, Diane, really, no kidding, what's the easy button? I said, boy, I wish I had one. And so this is really forcing us at Siemens and many companies, I'm sure you can all relate, to drive change at a rate and velocity that we never knew was possible, and yet we're doing it. And I think that's one of the positive outcomes to all of this craziness. If we have to look for a positive in all this crisis, we're finding ways to turn these unprecedented market challenges into opportunities. And I'll share just two really quick examples. In the spring, we started feeling the effects of the Great Resignation in our larger business units here in the US. We couldn't hire fast enough to keep up with demand. Hopefully some of you have felt that as well, because that's a good sign, right? Business growth. So TA co-created a customized plan with these business units to help widen our talent pools and also to help our businesses convert more of the candidates we did have in the pipeline, in the funnel, faster, but without compromising quality of hire. And so this was largely about changing hiring manager behavior. They had to really lean in and engage with talent acquisition and with the process in a way they hadn't before. And it's working. Our time to fill was at an all-time high before we implemented the plan. We've already reduced it by a week. We're keeping up with demand where we had been previously falling behind. And I think maybe the most compelling outcome is that there's agreement all the way around, even with our hiring managers, that we will never go back to the way we were doing things before, right? We've learned some lessons here. It was a little bit of an, like, I told you so moment for TA, like, hey, remember when we told you shouldn't do 16 successive interviews and then look for concurrence across all the, yeah, so really, no kidding, you can't do that now, right? So all of those things that we were, kind of nudging on before, we were really able to push forward. So that's a positive outcome. The other interesting thing we've done is we've implemented, and this was sort of in the works before the pandemic, but we accelerated it through the pandemic. We implemented a flexible rewards program. So I know you all know, we're all dealing with salary inflation and all of those concerns. Even before we started feeling the impacts of the Great Resignation, we were already thinking about how to make rewards and recognition more individualized and therefore more impactful for our employees. And so we started doing away with the old traditional performance rating system. Many of you may have gone through that as well. And we opted for an approach that we call growth talks, which emphasizes continuous quality dialogue between managers and employees. And an important part of these growth talks was asking our people what motivates them and how they like to be rewarded and recognized. And the answer is not always what we think it'll be. It's not always a merit increase. It could be a number of different things. And so we empowered managers to think beyond that traditional, 3% peanut butter merit spread. Maybe you've all experienced that, right? And to make rewards and recognition decisions that are more meaningful to our employees. We didn't realize when we were rolling this out how critically important and impactful that was going to be until now, when employee experience and really knowing our employees is the difference between an employee staying or leaving. Mm-hmm. So I could go on and on, but those are a few examples from Siemens.
And have you noticed then that employee experience that you're having to articulate, how you are articulating that to potential candidates has changed then?
It has, it's interesting, like on the flexible rewards topic in particular, we do some candidates say, oh, that's so cool. I love that. You're getting to know me and what motivates me. That's really cool. Others, maybe from more traditional backgrounds are saying, so wait a second, do I get my 3% or not? Like what's going on, right? And if you're not giving me 3%, if it's more individualized, how can I trust that my manager at Siemens is going to get that right for me? Right. And those are really fair questions. And I would say this year we're in a very transitional phase where all of our people managers are really, kind of getting accustomed and wrapping their arms around this new approach. I think, in the year ahead, we'll be better at it, but we're going to work out some kinks.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, Derek, similar question for you around employee value proposition and your company.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you for having me.
I think the audio is just a little bit funny again.
That a bit better?
It is. That's great. Thanks.
I'll sit a little bit closer. Hopefully that'll work out. So our employee value proposition is an exciting one in that we are transforming our business significantly. Liquid Telecom is now something of the past. We are now rebranded as Liquid Intelligent Technologies, and that rebranding happened earlier in the year, around April. And we are essentially a connectivity business. We are effectively Africa's ISP. That's our primary business. We have the first road from Cape to Cairo that Cecil John Rhodes imagined 200 years ago. And it was a Zimbabwean, Strive Masiyiwa, with his divinely inspired company. And this is the purpose bit that is so powerful. He was asked by his church to help defeat the evils of a declining education system in Zimbabwe, and started something that scared the ruling party to the extent that they tried to put him out of business. And out of that comes a powerful story that's resonating with everybody, not only in the company, but on the continent, to connect every African, because between Strive and the then top constitutional lawyer in Zimbabwe at the time, a gentleman by the name of Nick Rudnick, they won the constitutional right for every Zimbabwean to be connected. And they kind of liked this idea and said, well, why don't we make that our business plan? And that's pretty much what they've been doing for 19 years. We now sit with over 100,000 kilometers of fiber across Africa, as I said, from Cape to Cairo up the East Coast. It's our dominant route. And we're also moving through all the major economies, east to west as well. So it's really cool, and people recognize Strive. He is one of Africa's most renowned leaders. He actually made, I'm not sure if it was Time or Forbes, 50 most influential leaders in the world. So he's now sits on the board of Netflix, for example. So he's really got a story to tell that resonates with Africans. And we're hoping to leapfrog all the bad habits of the Northern Hemisphere and put in place technology and systems and things that are really going to take us into the future that we could be in. And of course, that from an employee value proposition is so powerful. My most recent hire, my own one in my team, I spent a significant amount of time warning him about how tough the job is. The value proposition of connecting every African is so powerful, because I haven't lied, and he's walked into a wall the second he started this job, and he knows what he's doing it for. So we're onto something here. So the employee value proposition is purpose driven, and it has to be, because we are facing incredible problems here. The regulatory environment is so diverse. We're in 15 African countries. The corruption across Africa is an incredibly difficult obstacle to overcome. And Strive, being a man of principle and a Christian man, one of our key principle directives is we will not do dirty business. We will not. And these are the kinds of things that are starting to actually get us to a point where I believe commercially we'll actually be able to charge a premium, because when you move into the C2, what we call the C2 space, which is cloud and cybersecurity, which is where we're moving into fast with partners like Microsoft on a pan-African basis. The fact that we've got a reputation for being secure and safe and credible and trustworthy is bringing us business, as opposed to other operators that would operate in a different way. So the employee value proposition is a commercial business proposition, and it's contradictory right now. The pattern is generally corrupt. And we've got a business and a partnership that is not that. So from an employee value proposition, we really have a powerful reason for them to join us. On the other hand, we've got an economy that is struggling. We will not see, I don't believe, although some of my colleagues in the talent space believe we will be behind the curve of the Northern Hemisphere and we would have some sort of great resignation. perhaps that might happen at some of the more senior talent levels, but we've got an unemployment rate in South Africa, an official unemployment rate of 35%. That's massive. That's the official. Unofficially, it's closer to around 45%, which is almost half the population, of which 70% are youth. And the issue is where this business is going in technology terms is vested in the youth and the software development and the cybersecurity and that space. So we've got a significant future skills challenge, and how we're overcoming that is capability development. There has been recently our group CEO, that Nick Grudnick, who won the constitutional battle. I won one with him, where he's recognized that development has got to be the way with the staff that we have, because we don't have attrition. People are holding on to their jobs. There's a lot of fear here. The vaccination issue is causing major problems, as it is anywhere else. And so we are dealing with a very typical construct. Our diversity is good, and our employee value proposition around those things are very strong. In fact, in South Africa, it's legislated. If we don't get it right, there are fines and consequences and so on, as well as, on the other hand, incentives. So we seem to be putting the pieces of the puzzle together as a baseline well, but the execution and the consistency and the talent retention for us is a whole different ball game, given our African, you'll hear it. It's Africa time. It's Africa context. It's the African story. So those are all very real cultural constructs, but exciting times. I'm really looking forward to resolving it. Our transformation has been slowed down by the pandemic. We had hoped to be what we call in our enterprise business space by now. We are really looking forward to becoming a player on a global scale, where we will be not only Pan-African, but a good connectivity base with redundancy routes between the Asias and Americas, and alternatives to the Northern Hemisphere route. So there's a lot of connectivity and doing business in Africa, and we want to be known as Africa's business network. But the pandemic and the be at home, not seeing clients, not being able to tell our story, not having the face-to-face relationships, all of that are major issues that are now prompting that, well, we need to get back to work. We need people back at the office. We need more face-to-face. And I think people are also a little bit tired of being locked up at home and being full-time dads, moms, school teachers, cooks, chefs. Oh, and then I have to be CFO and CMO and everything else. So I think the role resilience and the role splits are starting to bite a little bit. And what we're also finding, it was David from your firm, PwC in the States, that we undertook to check a study that came out that said productivity is actually up 14%. We went and checked the chat. We would say that productivity is up about 10%, but we're finding only 20% are carrying 80%. 20% of the people are carrying 80%, and there's 80% of the people who are either doing the same or less work and hiding behind the pandemic story. So our employee value proposition has to shift to accommodate what we're having a hard time measuring. But yeah, we've got a long way to go to deal with this. It's undoubtedly a new way of work, and we don't have the tools or the systems in place to check it. So that whole value proposition is completely being upended at the moment.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So what I did hear you say, though, is that purpose of the organization around connecting people is continues to be a draw for you and the organization to get that top talent coming in. And it sounds like, as Diane had said, there's a lot of shift happening around what does that employee contract really look like. Irene, could I ask to shift over to you and TD and then David to talk about PwC? Irene.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. Actually, I just found what Derek said incredibly interesting, and I feel like I've got a gazillion questions that I wanted to ask him. I think David, my co-panelist, was dying to ask a question too. But I'll start with what Diane said. I might sound, I'm going to try not to be very repetitive, because Diane brought up such great points and many similarities with what we're doing at TD Bank. And just for, I think it's clear we are a bank based on our name. We are a global player, but we are certainly have the biggest prominence in North America. We're number one or number two, depending on the day and how you rank us in Canada. We're number 6 in the US. And really proud to say that we just got named as the number 1 bank in North America on the Forbes 500 Employers Award. So we're really excited about that. We've got 96,000 colleagues across the world, majority again in North America. In terms of our employee value proposition, I would say that it has not changed through the pandemic. It actually has been, I would say, our savior through the pandemic to not experience the Great Resignation. We are very purpose-driven, Derek, at TD Bank for sure. We call it, instead of employee value proposition, we call it our colleague promise. And it really is about impact, growth, and the culture of care. And because it has always been about a culture of care, it really fares well during something like the pandemic. I think all employers over-indexed on supporting their colleagues through the pandemic. Because we already had that culture, it really supported us. It was authentic. It wasn't that we were doing it for the first time. So that was really important to us. And it's interesting, we haven't seen significant numbers of attrition. In fact, our numbers are probably the same as they were pre-pandemic. But when we actually dig into our numbers, what we have found is that the attrition is happening at the new to the bank colleague. And that tells us a little bit about something I think you, Derek, mentioned around people wanting to come back, or I'm actually thinking of it as if you don't have a connectivity with that organization because you're relatively new to the organization, it's very easy for you to find something interesting somewhere else because you don't have that attachment. You've never met your manager, you've never met your team except on, a forum like this in Zoom. So, you've never had to like stare them down and say, I'm going to leave you now. Like you don't have, it's easy to say I'm leaving you. I've never really even connected with you. So we're definitely finding it's the new employees. There are really those that, if there's anybody leaving, those are the ones that are being targeted for sure, or more likely. We definitely are feeling other things. We're feeling this great pressure around marketable skill sets, especially in the US. It has become incredibly competitive. And I have no idea where the comp is going to tap, but at some point there's got to be a ceiling. I don't know, Diane, but there has to be a ceiling somewhere in there, because that has been one of the biggest challenges. We've done some proactive elements for sure. We assessed our comp. We thought we were well positioned. We made some significant moves in comp, both in the US and Canada, but still on those very high marketable capabilities, it's still challenging, and people are coming forward and saying, hey, I want to discuss my comp and I want to stay because I love this organization, but just found out that my best friend got X at Y company. And so let's talk about it. So we think that colleagues are definitely coming to the table and wanting to renegotiate their contract. And so we're definitely seeing a bit of that as well. On some aspects, because our organization has also been growing, so there's acceleration in some elements, contact centers. As you can imagine, when things start shutting down, our contact center volumes went crazy. Investments, people have more money to invest, so our investment areas are all in accelerated growth. So trying to find talent while you're competing with other businesses, they're also trying to find that same talent has certainly put a lot of pressure on us, and especially on the talent acquisition teams. And I know, Diane, you mentioned a couple of, how people managers have to lean in now and you're partnering more, and we've always wanted that. Same thing for us. We've had to say, hey, let's do this together, or you're not going to get the numbers that you need because we're just not magicians. So we definitely have leveraged the partnerships, and that actually is a great thing. And I'm hopeful that that is going to stick around. So there's some really good benefits. The other thing that I've seen that is a big benefit, and I think it has enhanced our colleague, not our colleague promise, but our offering to our colleagues, has been, the remote work place. If you think we have about 8,000, probably almost 10,000 now, colleagues that work in contact center environments who never had an opportunity to work remotely. I mean, contact centers are like, it's on site. If you've ever seen one of them, it's kind of like a manufacturing plant. They're all sitting in a specific space. They're tied to their phones. When they've gone to the washroom, everything, right? It all metricized, I call it. And absenteeism is usually higher in those environments. Attrition is usually higher. Well, we kind of turned that around, which is really, really incredible, because we pivoted very, very quickly early on in the pandemic, and we were able to move them all to working from home. It was a quite, I would tell you, it might seem like it would be like not that difficult, but for a financial industry that's highly regulated, privacy regulatory requirements, having people actually serve customers from their home was a massive undertaking. And we, with our technology partners that are fabulous, we're able to do that very quickly. And our attrition, which we didn't expect attrition to decrease at that time, but to increase, but it did actually decrease. We also, absenteeism dropped drastically, and our colleague engagement went through the roof. And just recently, we've made the decision to communicate to all our contact centers that post-pandemic, they will continue to have the option to work remotely. And I can only tell you, it has been a party ever since, because they are ecstatic about that proposition. They have greater flexibility. We've instituted things like split shifts, so you can go drop off your children, come back, get on, take, maybe the lunch, go pick them up after school. We never had that. You couldn't do that if you're working on site. So I think we've actually, the offerings of what we were able to provide our colleagues has actually increased. And maybe that, together with our culture of care that we already had at TD Bank, has really been protecting us from the Great Resignation. So we feel very lucky. We do know that our leaves of absence have increased. And that's because people, of course, had to make some tough choices. If they didn't have schools to send their children to, they had to stay home with them, and maybe they couldn't balance, obviously, being able to do if they're small children. We think there's definitely going to be a segment of those individuals that will at some point be saying, I'm actually going to make the decision not to come back. So we are definitely anticipating that, and we're starting to monitor to see how big that segment will be. Early indications doesn't suggest a big segment, in fact, because again, of all the flexibility that we're offering in terms of where you can work from and how you can make your hours. But we do still expect that there will be some impact to that for sure. So that's probably the only thing that we're starting to look for. But outside of that, it's similar changes, I think, to what Diane shared. And as Derek said, I think purpose is so important, especially in these times, and it's really fair as well.
And the one thing that I keep hearing from Diane to Derek and Irene is that care for each of our employees. And I know with David, that's a big area of focus as well for PwC. And David, I wonder if you'd like to speak to us just a little bit about the organization and what you've seen shift over the past couple of years, particularly around that employee value proposition or that employee contract and how that's been shifting.
Yeah, absolutely, Tiffany. It's probably worth me giving a quick synopsis of who PwC are and how we're structured. For many of you who might not know, we are effectively a network of mutually exclusive member firms or LLPs, partnerships, all coming together under one banner that is the global PwC network. In short, the US firm is different to the UK firm, is different to the China firm. And all of them have the autonomy to move however which way they want. But generally we flow in the same direction under the global leadership who don't actually have power over the firms, but set the tone. So what we're seeing happening in the US in relation to COVID and how they're managing the new deal, so to speak, is different to what we're seeing in the UK, and I'll explain that in more detail. In terms of the employee value proposition, I know the term, the Great Resignation, has been talked about, and one of the terms that I've sort of been speaking to my colleagues about is the Great Renegotiation, which is the new deal that employees are negotiating with their employers. I think how they experience that relationship pre-COVID is different to how they want the deal to look going forward. And I think it's a transformation that's been driven by the employee base that is in parts being met with some resistance, because usually transformation is led from the top, from the senior leadership versus the employee base. And you're seeing it happening all at the same time, and you're seeing it happening at scale, where employees are effectively saying that we've had 18 months in a lockdown situation to reflect on what is important to us in life, what is important to us with respect to our relationship with work, and we want a different set of terms. So that's impacted us with attrition. We've seen it, and I think to give context to that, our product is time and resource. So our product is people, which means we deploy people on site at your organizations, at corporations, to increase our revenues versus any sort of physical product that we're selling. What that has meant is, in this COVID scenario, a bad economy is great for us as well, because we advise when there's trouble and when it's good times. People have been exhausted and there's kind of been no finish line. So we almost expected that when lockdown lifted, everyone would be a bit more relaxed and re-energized, but that hasn't necessarily happened. And what we're seeing is people are moving away from the industry or moving to other organizations who are competitors for huge uptick. I'm talking 2x, 2.5, 3x current compensation. So we're also seeing a lot of attrition to industry. By that I mean to corporations, and moving away from the advisor world. And I think that will continue to happen in the short to medium term. I think an important point to pick up on is not just the push factors, but also the pull factors that we're seeing in the economy. If we can reflect to the 2012 financial crisis, when that happened, there was about $1.8 trillion in the private equity, private capital markets to help the market recover post-crisis. Today we have about 7 trillion. And what it's doing to the broader macro environment is we're seeing a record number of M&A deals in H1 2021, because there's so much money to invest. And when you have that much money to invest, talent acquisition is a way of growing inorganically. So we're seeing huge pull factors where firms are saying, just go and hire, we've got a lot of money to spend, and we need to catch up on some of the lost ground over the last 18 months, plus people reevaluating their lives and what's important to them. You then have the implications of physically being at home and technology. It's a lot easier to interview. Whereas when you're going to the office, it's harder to maybe have that conversation with a headhunter, and it's harder certainly to go to interviews. Now you can do 2 or 3 in a day from home quite easily. That is encouraging more engagement with external opportunities. With respect to our response to that, we're flying the plane and building it at the same time, if I'm speaking entirely honestly, because our internal firm services, so your HR, your recruitment, your resource management teams, which is the teams that, man the teams that we put on client situations, they're all burnt out too. And the messaging that is going back up to the top is effectively, look, we need a time out here. Either you drastically increase the resources that we have to do our roles, or more people will leave. And that message has been heard from the center and of our leadership team. We're seeing even more headcount being put into the system, more so than typically would have been, invested in recent years. So there's a huge amount of renegotiation that's happening, both from the employees as well as the leadership saying, actually, now's the time to ask us. The business are listening. Let's ask for it all and see what we can get. I think the lag of resignations that were going to happen pre-COVID, we're starting to see that come through now. The market is stabilized. People are less nervous about changing roles. So that is going to play out. And then once a load of new hires happen over the next 6 months, they will also do some hiring into their team. So I think it's going to be something that is with us, and we see over the next 9 months, 12 months across a macro scale. But it's an interesting time to be an employee. I think the employee has never had as much leverage as it has right now. And people are either saying, look, now's the time to be aggressive and be bullish with, either our employer and say we want more. If they don't give it to us, we'll go and cash in elsewhere, or it might not necessarily be a move, but it might be more flexibility with respect to location and where you work, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we've got some feedback somewhere there. I noticed that historically, I came out of consulting background as well, and it used to be that you were on the road all the time, so it was a lifestyle choice at that time. And I'm just curious about your comments of how that's shifted and how that's helping, perhaps even moving into, as you're hiring and attracting people in, what that message looks like. You don't have to move here, you don't have to move there. maybe you're not even on the road. How much? Just any comments from you, David, on how that's shifted at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about, take the Middle East as a region, you can't be an advisor in that region without going in country and pressing palms. The whole remote advising to the Middle East just is not something that they were keen to engage in. However, they were forced to in COVID. And we are seeing that post-COVID, some organizations are still maintaining that relationship of you don't need to have your advisors flying in. And we're talking more about net zero and managing our environmental impact as advisors. And we are seeing a huge drop in travel. Naturally, that'll pick up as people get more comfortable being in the office. But I think it's dropped certainly, and there'll be less travel. More people, therefore, will probably stay in the industry, especially as they start to build families. Traditionally, a lot of people move into corporates to get away from the traveling that the advisory world brings with it. But I think overall, it's gonna drop.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's that feedback again. Thank you. So just everyone on the line joining us today, please get your questions ready. And if you'd like to put some of them in the chat box now, we're going to be taking those shortly, and we will open up cameras and mics shortly. But just furthering on David's comments on travel and needing to relocate, Diane, I'm very curious, and Irene, about how that's looked for you as you're attracting key talent and trying to fill these key roles. What's that looking like for people who are saying, yeah, I don't actually want to relocate now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Siemens is a very global company, and we've always been all about mobility and global mobility, but also just domestic relocation and mobility. And I wouldn't say that we've been trying to think of ways to make relocation more attractive, but what we're really trying to do is rethink our own expectations and requirements around relocation. I mean, obviously relocation took a hit during the pandemic, huge, but now we're finding that not only are candidates not as interested in relocating as they were pre-COVID, but many of them think it is utterly ridiculous that we're even asking them. I mean, at least that's been they're like, really?
Yeah.
Really? Right. And they kind of have a point, right? So what we've been talking about internally is let's rethink this a little bit. If we really need, and never has this been more important, to keep our talent aperture as wide as possible, do we want to limit ourselves based on unnecessary relocation requirements? And we knew that some of our leaders would be really flexible on this and others are more traditional. And this was very similar to the conversations we had early in the pandemic around remote and hybrid work. And so what we did, and this is not rocket science, but what we did is we put that business necessity lens on this topic, right? So looking at relocation from the perspective of, is it an absolute business necessity to have this person based in XYZ location, really shifts the conversation from what the hiring manager prefers, right, to what is absolutely essential for our business. And that brings all of the options into focus. And we found through that process a lot more flexibility on location, which has helped us continue to compete and keep our talent aperture as wide as possible, which we need because our talent pools are smaller than they were pre-pandemic. And when we do relocate, of course, we're offering competitive reload packages, because if we don't, our competitors will. It's that simple.
Yep, that's very true. Irene, you want to
Yeah.
join?
Yeah, so not very different. I'd say we've got such a wide footprint. And so our only really stance is that we want to hire within our footprint. So if the best talent, the hiring manager is in Toronto, but the best talent is in Florida, we hire them in Florida because we've got a footprint in Florida. So that's kind of how we're based it. We've tried not to go outside of the footprint. That doesn't mean it's 100%. We do have some exceptions, but we strive not to go outside of our footprint because it goes back to the discussion around connectivity and culture. We want to really balance still having the opportunity to bring people into a office, into an event. And we want to make sure that those are going to be purposeful. So not just coming to the office just because we need to see you in an office, but you're going to come in at certain times of the year because we're going to have some culture building event. Maybe we're doing our priority setting, whatever, or maybe there's just a team event, a road show, whatever it may be. So the footprint is really important for us. And so that's kind of what our stance has been, which wasn't different pre-pandemic. However, we did contend with hiring managers' preferences more so then, to your point, Diane. So I think, hiring managers would be like, well, I really like having my team where I can kind of, be around them all the time. So now that's not the case. We had early in the pandemic, we did a big assessment of roles and kind of the business necessity, I think you called it. But, in terms of roles and the type of skill set and the type of work they did it have to be on-site, off-site, or somewhat of a hybrid? What we found is that the overwhelming majority of all our jobs don't have to necessarily be on-site. Even jobs, again, I mentioned the contact center, that's a prime example, but stores in the US, branches in Canada, for example, traditionally, all those colleagues that work in those environments, including managers, have always been on-site 100% of the time. Now they're not on-site 100% of the time. We have them interacting with customers, providing financial advice on Zoom calls or, different mediums, but that sort of opportunity. So even in those roles, there's going to be some flexibility on where they can work from. Not every single role, like if your customer experience kind of associate a frontline person that takes your deposit and your withdrawal because you're not yet using an ATM machine, for example, that's still a person that has to be in the office. But the majority of our roles are actually very flexible today. And so relocation is not really becoming a big issue. We've just hired some very senior leaders, and we hire them in Florida, for example, which, majority of our very senior leaders kind of, we're in our head offices, whether in Toronto or whether in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. So we definitely are just looking at if the best talent is in a particular area, and as long as it's in the footprint, then that's kind of the way we're going.
I like that lens of, do we really need, is there a real business reason for this role being located in X location? That's great. Just moving over to some of the questions that are coming through in the chat area. And I see that Diane and our other panelists have started to respond to some of those just directly. And our partner, Ken Grieger, he had asked a great question here. How are you addressing, and more importantly, how are you communicating your sensitivity to the emotional recovery that must happen and take longer? And David, I think you wanted to chime in on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one requires a huge amount of humility from the leadership. Be willing to listen to the upward feedback, and your middle management team need to consistently seek out feedback to relay up the chain, so that there's a constant temperature check of how the team is feeling. And as I said to some colleagues the other week, when it comes to health, we readily and easily recognize physical well-being, even mental health well-being, but oftentimes forget social well-being is also a definition of health. And for a long time, we've had to compromise or completely ignore our social well-being in the lockdown scenario we've all been in. And we're now starting to see the impact of that. What happens when you have no social health for such a long time? I've seen culture carriers who are usually high energy, and the people who are bringing others along in the team turn into zombies. And I don't say that in a mean way. I say it as a matter of fact. And you kind of take pause to realize, okay, this is actually really impacting people quite difficultly and on scale. So to manage that, I think we have to sort of look after each other as a recruitment leadership team and say, hey, mate, you're not the same John Smith that I saw 6 months ago. Maybe it's time for a bit of a break and maybe take 4 weeks out. And people have been using, because I think taking time off for well-being is not something that usually people would do pre-COVID, but I think now they recognize you do need to have a break, because you've not been able to take holidays like you normally would, to take a time out, to take 4 weeks off, and also manage that communication to the business to say, hey, look, we are working at 110%, and to manage the well-being of our team, we need to let you know that the quality of service isn't going to be what it was 6 months ago. And that's not because we don't care, but we're managing expectations. Bear with us. And I think you'll find your leaders, the good ones in the business and otherwise, will recognize, yeah, I'm seeing it in my team too. So thank you for letting me know. I think the communication piece is key. And then also, what did PwC do? So for end of year reviews, we changed our grading system. So normally we'd have 1 to 5, 1's the top performer, 5, you're perhaps in trouble. We changed it to 1, 2, and 5. 2 encompassed 2, 3, and 4 gradings for the year. So 85% of the workforce was guaranteed a 2, you know, just to relieve some of the stress on people. And then the top 10% got a 1, and the 5% of the workforce might have gone the 5. But in the main, most people were told you're going to get this bonus and it's going to be standardized, and you don't have to go through the same review process. That alleviated a lot of stress and worry towards the end of the year. But back to my earlier point, humility is so key in all of this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Derek, you wanted to jump in on this topic too. Oh, I think you're on mute. There you go.
That happened.
There you go.
Can you hear me well enough now?
Yes. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, David, I can't agree more. That humility word, I was going to use a word like sensitivity, but I think humility is far better from a leadership perspective. In engaging the staff with what Diane coined as a really nice phrase of growth dialogue. We've got an interesting situation in particular, and I'll talk to South Africa, which is 50% of our business in both in terms of staff as well as turnover. And we have probably the most advanced constitution on the planet right now, and I'm talking country constitution. It is highly enlightened, totally human rights based. It's got all the bells and whistles that you would imagine in it. Unfortunately, with our corrupt execution arm being the rule of law, enforcing it is very difficult. So being able to rely on law to protect a perspective on either a vaccination issue or an employee value proposition or any of the things, and performance management also being one of them, is very difficult to get things right. We're still in a highly unionized environment, where particularly for our traditional business, some of our technical staff would fit within that space. And now we're also trying to transform into a highly technology orientated business with an entirely different skill set and group of people that would not be unionized. And being able to cope with that broad range of people in our organization requires humility and maturity from our leadership. And we kind of still sit with a level of maturity that's vested in the old construction business we used to be. And I would have liked to be less of what we used to be now already, which is that construction business that's really good at digging holes in the ground and planting fiber. But that still is a pervasive part of who we are at the moment. And the transformation into this critical thinking, innovative, agile business that meets customer demands, helps with software applications and development to meet you where you're at, and dealing with that broad range of challenges is a tough ask for our leadership and the people in the business. And that's part of the transformative challenge that we face now. And listening, I think, to your point, David, is going to be key, and providing for that opportunity to exchange and engage, and really coming up with some robust but simple answers in the short term, and building on that over the medium term is the way that we're going to overcome it. If we take hardcore, immediate decisions that will polarize the issue even further than it already is, I think we're in for a rough ride. And our already tenuous situation of staying afloat in our tough economies will be worsened. So yeah, I love that word. And I think it's humility, listening, communication, and some easily executable stuff that matters for us on the ground, as opposed to relying on a really sexy constitution.
That's great. I like Diane's comment in the chat box too, just about this is a big EQ moment for leaders and how they handle that. And Irene, did you want to add to that conversation about just how to add to the healing and help employees through this and leaders?
Yeah, I just was typing away and just pressed send, but yeah, we've had, again, we relied a lot on our culture and the fact that, again, it wasn't new in terms of many things that we're doing, but we upped the game, I would say. We made sure that all leaders, all people managers were increasing the time that they were spending with their teams individually and in teams. And one of the things we actually have been hearing, because we're doing regular touch point surveys, so we're constantly every few weeks we're running a bit of an employee survey just to see how people are feeling. And one of the things that we've learned is that employees are telling us that they've gotten to know their managers, and managers have gotten to know them better than they did pre-pandemic, because they've been spending more time together. I mean, not just beyond the fact that they know what each other's kitchens and bedrooms and living rooms look like, but also the fact that they've had more conversations, more personal conversations as well. So there certainly has been a lot more of that. We've also tried to make sure, because there is this burnout, you hear the burnout, you hear people feeling just, there's so much going on in their lives. So right from the beginning, we also had a lot of things like, your kids could join you on the Zoom, your pets could join. Like, we never had any issues with that. In fact, we kind of celebrated that as if that was like a good thing, like that's actually good. It's part of who you are. It's part of what you have. I had a colleague on my team who has 4 small little kids, and there was never a meeting where he didn't have one of them on his lap, and that was fine. We still were able to proceed. But then we started thinking, also you need some breaks, because the problem is that we're going through so much change and there's so much happening that we're also asking a lot more of our people. So we put in a couple of kind of guardrails. We changed our meetings so that no longer be 60 minutes, they're 50. So it gives everybody at least a little break before they get onto them. Or if they're 30 minutes, they're 20-minute meetings. We said no meetings before 9, no meetings after 5. And that seems like maybe that's the way it should always be, but I'll tell you, it's not the way it was. We said no meetings at lunch. That's like just between noon and 1. If nobody in the organization is really having those meetings, that means that everybody can have a lunch. And that's new too, because I mean, when you're in the office, how often were you eating at your desk while you're, talking or doing something? So we're trying to do things like that. We instituted things like, no videos for 1 day every week, because people start also getting exhausted of having to be on video. And there was the feeling of, if so-and-so is on the video, I feel like I have to be on it, even though you tell me I don't have to be on it. So we started instituting. So a lot of elements around how we could help them. It didn't fix everything. I will tell you that if I speak specifically to my talent acquisition team, they have been running crazy, as probably every talent acquisition has, because of the fact that we've been hiring. So, our volumes of hiring have been increased. So it's been really hard to help them. I know there's been some questions around whether businesses have provided more funding. And they have, in a way. This has been a time where they needed more, so they needed to. They were pressured to, but it still didn't take away from the pressure that our recruiters and sources have been living under. And that team for sure has been going all out. So we really have been trying to apply all these wellness kind of guardrails to that group who has really, really needed it. So there's no magic bullet, but we're trying to stay close. We're trying to do what we can to make sure that we help them. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. There's still ways to go, but we certainly have tried our best to. And we also have a lot of forums where we're asking for their feedback. So what else should we be doing? Is there anything else? From a compensation perspective, probably many organizations have done so as well. But we also provided bonuses out of cycle for all individuals that worked on site. They all got, a change. So we did things like that as well, to make sure that we were rewarding people, not just, recognizing and taking care, but rewarding them as well.
Yeah, great ideas. Yeah, great ideas. I see that my colleagues, Jerry and Umran, have joined me again.
I was just going to add to one point as well that
Yeah, sure.
did land well for us and our teams. Hearing thank you from the boss, hearing thank you from the chairman. Just cheers, guys. Thank you. Really appreciate it. That had a massive impact, because one of the things that we discussed in our leadership strategy at the start of the year was we're giving all this feedback from the business on the things we can improve. What about the thank you? Just a simple thing like that can go a long way in letting people know they're valued.
Jerry, did you want to do our wrap up for us? You're just on mute right now. There we
Take my
go.
stuff off me. Good deal. Well, thank you all very much. Just what a fantastic, provocative conversation, and just so honest and authentic. And I've been around a long time. And I remember a book 40 years ago was written. It was by John Nesbitt, and it was called Megatrends. And the subtitle was 10 New Directions Transforming Our Lives. When I think about that book, and it didn't anticipate a pandemic, and we are living in a mega force right now, not a mega trend, right? The trend is a long run. This is like immediate. And so I just, am a recruiter. You're all recruiters too. And I'm a recruiter, and I always like to write down when a candidate, when I hear something I've never quite heard before. And so, Diane, thank you for your comments. Love the, where's the easy button? Widen the aperture of the talent search as wide as possible. Growth talks, right? That word in terms of a performance assessment or a performance review, like, oh no, I'm going to my growth talk right now instead of my, so changing that paradigm, changing it. So Derek, just leapfrogging all the mistakes of the Northern Hemisphere. That's just so well put. Connecting every African. The employee value proposition is purpose driven, and we will not do dirty. It's Africa's time, and while you may not have all the tools we're looking for, Irene. By the way, my dog is right here, Irene, next to me in this chair. She's always here. But the colleague promise, culture of care. Relaxing the what a transformational thing, the relaxing of the contact center and changing that paradigm and increasing effectiveness and production is just fantastic. Meetings going 50 minutes and 20 minutes instead of an hour. The thoughtfulness is just fantastic. And David, the great new negotiation. Our product is people and time. Easy. It is easy for employees to talk to us now. That is true. and the search industry's certainly been transformed at this time, but that's another whole big subject. So it's an interesting time to be an employee, never a better time. There's humility in the C-suite and at the board level and with CEOs saying thank you. My feeling is I'm just really grateful for how much humanity is in the upper reaches of leadership in the boardrooms, and hopefully a time where we're going to get rid of the old construct of authoritarian and autocratic leadership, and just have the organizations celebrate humanity. I'll stop there. Thank you all very much. I think we're ending right on time, Tiffany, and so I really appreciate. We so appreciate, and let's keep talking. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Wonderful.